Now, with just about 13 months to the next general election, the Jubilee government remains hopeful of delivering key milestones promised while campaigning for office. With a penultimate budget for their tenure out now, tonight on the front row, we assess Kenya's key projects under the Big Four agenda that were meant to accelerate the realization of Vision 2030 development blueprint. We also look at budgetary allocations to these legacy projects as we interrogate their impact to the economy and overall to Wananchi. I am Akisa Wandera. Thank you for joining us on the program. Please engage with us on our Twitter poll question, where we are asking you, are you satisfied with the government's implementation of development projects against funds allocated to them? Are you satisfied with the government's implementation of development projects against funds allocated to them? The hashtag to use is front row. Tweeters at Akisa Wandera, at KTN News KE. Our text line is also open, 22155, and be sure to tell us where you're writing from. Any questions to our panelists, I'll be sure to pose them for you. So joining us for this conversation, Kenneth Mwige will be joining us a bit later. He's the Director General of the Kenya Vision 2030 Delivery Secretariat. He has a wide range experience in the private sector, development, NGO space, and in the public sector. Mr. Mwige has experience in international relations, diplomacy, governance, anti-corruption, banking, shipping and maritime affairs, as well as international trade and development, and he'll be joining us shortly on the show. We also have Wanjiru Gikonyo, not new to the show, a champion for participatory devolved governance in Kenya and has over 15 years in the promotion of citizen-led accountability. As an advocate for constitutionalism, Wanjiru has been on the forefront of a number of landmark public interest cases, including the Constituency Development Fund case and the cases challenging the illegal transfer of Nairobi County functions. She's the national coordinator at the Institute for Social Accountability. Wanjiru, thank you for always honoring our invite here on Front Row. And finally, Bill Okero, also not new to the show, is a former senator for Mandera County in the Senate. He was the chairperson of the Finance, Commerce and Budget Committee, a member of the Devolved Government Sessional Committee, and a member of the Liaison Committee. He is also a member of the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya and Institute of Certified Public Secretaries of Kenya. He's also a certified corporate governance trainer, and he has extensive audit and accounting experience in both public and private sectors. Mr. Bill Okero, thank you for joining us tonight here on the front row. And before we get into that conversation, let's just take a look at a report by our Patrick Amimo, where with less than 13 months to the end of President Uhuru Kenyatta's tenure, a majority of the Big Four agenda projects are yet to take shape. Plans by the government to achieve a 100% universal health coverage by establishing a national health scheme and making it mandatory for Kenyan adults to contribute to the National Hospital Insurance Fund is facing resistance. And the manufacturing sector continues to decline due to a prohibitive tax regime and rising energy costs. Our senior political reporter, Patrick Amimo, scrutinizes the legacy projects.
So this is another ultrasound.
President Uhuru Kenyatta unveiled the Big Four agenda as an accelerated 5-year development plan that will define his last term in office. Implementation of the agenda has faced challenges. Indications that all was not well came to the fore when the Big Four agenda projects were allocated 123.8 billion shillings in the 2020-2021 national budget that ends on June 30th. This was a massive drop from 450.9 billion shillings allocated in the 2019-2020 financial year and 400 billion shillings allocated in the 2018-2019 budget. The government planned to achieve 100% universal health coverage by next year. Racing against time, the government is now proposing to establish the National Health Scheme and make it mandatory for all Kenyan adults to contribute to the National Hospital Insurance Fund. Proposals to increase the statutory contributions have been opposed by the workers' umbrella body, KOTU, and the Federation of Kenya Employers.
The main impact it will have is actually increasing the cost of employment, which directly hits the employer.
The voluntary arrangements that they are now, where Kenyans are being persuaded, they've been given the opportunity to contribute 500 bob a month, even now, many people are not doing it because they simply don't have the money.
The government promised to ensure 50% of the gross domestic product from the manufacturing sector that will create 1 million jobs. However, there has been a decline in GDP contribution by the manufacturing sector. In 2016, manufacturing contributed 9.2% to the GDP and 8.4% in 2017. In 2018, manufacturing sector's contribution to GDP was 7.8% and reduced to 7.5% in 2019. This is an indication that Kenya is deindustrializing instead of industrializing. The situation has been made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic.
COVID-19 wiped out 34% of jobs in the micro enterprises. If we extrapolate these numbers to the 15 million wage employment in the informal sector, it means that COVID-19 did not only stop the creation of jobs in the micro enterprises, but it also wiped out 5.1 million jobs in the informal sector.
The Stanbic Bank Market Report for 2021 indicates a decline in new businesses and activities by 1.1%. However, the economic growth outlook is still positive.
On the housing agenda, the Kenyatta administration promised to build 500,000 new homes by 2022. 28 counties were expected to put up 2,000 units each per year. A paltry 1% of the houses have been delivered.
Very many times the things we do, unless they're really targeted, they don't get down there to ordinary people. And you see, you have to explain to the ordinary people how infrastructure, for example, the port, the port in Kisumu or the port in Lamu is going to translate to their daily livelihoods. You might find that, if you don't have money to start a business, even for 2,000 shillings, small business, small micro trade, whether somebody does a road that can take you to the next point of the market, it will not make a difference.
On food security, the government promised to reduce the number of those who are food insecure by half. It is estimated that up to 10 million Kenyans rely on food relief. By April this year, an estimated 1.5 million Kenyans in arid and semi-arid areas were facing hunger. Patrick Amimo, KTN News.
Patrick Amimo there just giving us a precursor on what will form the basis of our conversation. Legacy projects for the Jubilee government. President Uhuru Kenyatta leaving office in about a year or so. What is he leaving Kenya with in terms of a legacy? Of course, I have three guests to just help us break down some of these things. On Thursday, the budget 2021-2022 was read in Parliament. Very expansive and ambitious budget as described by many. Bilokero, I think I'll start with you because I saw you in studio that day. So then let's just begin from that point where what does this budget represent?
The 2021-22 budget is not significantly different from the budget of the previous year by the Jubilee administration. It's a budget which basically reflects a government that is living far beyond its means. And that has, I used one word to describe this budget, is reckless. Because you have a situation where you are spending twice as much as you are generating in terms of revenue. In a time, and the result and the implications of that is that there will be more taxes and more hardships because of the measures that the government has put in place to try and, generate revenues. And right. At the time when we have a pandemic, we are in the middle of a crisis. You have had 30% of the jobs have been lost in the medium and the small and medium enterprises. It's not the time to really to have a very expansive budget where you're going to tax Kenyans more. You are taxing them on bread. You are taxing them on every little thing. That there's literally no item today in this country that is not being taxed or serviced. That has made things more expensive and the life more difficult and the cost of living very high for Kenyans. And what is the result of that? More poverty, more jobs lost, no incomes. And this is impacting also on all those things that we have had. The industry, for example, depends on people having income. People, creating demand. So I think the budget clearly, in my view, was reckless, because I mean it didn't have to be that big, really. I mean,
but you've said that it wasn't different from what you have seen or we have seen in previous years.
In terms of the deficits,
yes.
You know, in terms of the spending being much higher than the revenues, it's been the same for the last few years by this government.
So what different thing did you expect to see?
No, what we expected is that because of the crisis that we have now, the pandemics, the job crisis, the lack of employment, and all these things, and the government ought to have been a bit more rational in terms of rationalizing its expenditure. We expected the government to cut down on some of its, spending, so that then, we don't have to get into a situation where we have to borrow, $1 trillion shillings just to, keep the government running. I think that's a concern.
Right. Wanjiru, do you think this was a pro-Mwananchi budget?
No, Akisa, thank you so much. And I fully associate with Bilo's sentiments. This budget was more of the same, of the expansionary budget we've seen from the administration. And the word he uses is exactly right, it's reckless. And it's rooted in an expansionary and irresponsible manifesto that the administration touted. It's rooted in their misplaced philosophy and priorities around large infrastructure projects being the basis of growth. And it's rooted, of course, in the budgeted corruption that is already in the budget. And there are projects in that budget that have driven up debt that remain intact. It is also a fiscal consolidation budget. It's the first time the IMF has formally come to the fore, because the IMF has been there pulling the strings from behind the scenes. But in April, they signed the agreement with Kenya, which means we are able to access IMF assistance, essentially putting us in receivership. It's essentially saying we are not able to pay our own bills, and so they need to step in to help us rationalize our spending. So it is a fiscal consolidation budget, and the IMF's big priority, and this is based on the data they've been given by the Treasury. Their big priority is to tax Kenyans. There are a few good things that the IMF have brought up in terms of transparency, but you have to look at the good, you have to look at the bad and the downright ugly. And really, it's not a good budget for the Mwananchi, not in terms of the taxes being proposed, which I hope Parliament will reject, not in terms of the deficit, as Bilo has said, and not in terms of what are the benefits to Kenyans? If we have a 3 trillion shilling budget, does that mean our health service is better, our access to health? Does it mean that farmers, the biggest contributor really in terms of employment in the country, and the sector really that remained very resilient during COVID, does it mean that we are going to have more money, more investment in farming, in farmers, in supporting the real priorities? Or does it mean we have misaligned priorities, spending on large projects that are not productive? So no, this is not a Mwananchi budget. It's not a responsible budget. Unfortunately, it's more of the same, and it is painful for Kenyans.
And I like that you've mentioned something on the IMF. We'll be coming on to that later. You've talked about priority areas, and you talk about farmers. It's inclusive in the big 4 pillars for President Uhuru Kenyatta. When we talk about food security, that has been factored in the budget. What would you have wanted, perhaps, to see differently as far as that is concerned?
What the Parliamentary Budget Office said in its review of the budget policy statement at the beginning of the year is that whereas we do have agriculture as one of the pillars of the big 4, spending to the sector has been falling. So that when you look at spending as a percentage of the GDP, it's been falling. The types of investments that have been going into agriculture are not in line with the needs on the ground. So actually the budget policy statement, when the budget policy office, when reviewing the budget policy statement, said the government needs to reprioritize, take this money, put it into agriculture, and do so through an effective intergovernmental mechanism, because of course agriculture is devolved. So there is a disconnect, Akisa, and this is where I think the administration is very effective, because they do quite a lot of spin. They sell their policies by saying we have a big 4 agenda on agriculture. Yes, but where is the money really going? And is it going to where it's needed most and in adequate amounts? And the answer, unfortunately, is no.
What worries you the most, Bilokero, about the Big 4 agenda with just about 13 months to go to the next general election? Most of the timelines that have been put in place have not been achieved or have not been met. Where is the missing link here?
Let me just to add on the point Gikonyo has raised on agriculture. You know, as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Look at the reaction of the farmers in this country. In every sector, coffee, tea, livestock, sugar has collapsed, the cereals, every sector has been having a problem. Yet, this is one of the #1, legacy project in this Big 4. And yet, 3 years down the road, we had the same situation in agriculture. In fact, worse. Many of the sectors are not performing. Today, we are in a situation where we are importing basic vegetables from our neighboring countries into this country, unfortunately, including even the cereals like maize and so forth.
Maize, yeah.
So it's clearly an indictment of the government that has failed in not just in assisting in farmers in that competitiveness in production, but also in marketing its products. But let me come to the legacy. I think from what we have seen, we have spent in the 3 years since the Big 4 agenda came up nearly 1 trillion shillings, including this year's budget. Nearly 1 trillion shillings has gone into the Big 4 legacy. But if you have had in each of them, housing nearly 1% of the units being done, health, only 4 counties that were launched, and up to now, even those 4 counties are still having challenges. And really, in terms of the universal health, you can see the situation where we are in, particularly worsened by the COVID, in many of the counties. Manufacturing, let me tell you, forget about the fact that the contribution by manufacturing to GDP is declining. It's not only that, even in the growth, our average GDP growth for the last 10 years has been about 5.5%. But if you look at how much does manufacturing contribute to that growth, last year it was about 0.4%. All the way from nearly 0.7 or close to 1% in around 2012, 2010, around 2010. So it's going down. Why? Because we have lost the competitiveness. And I'll give you an example. 2 key areas of competitiveness. One, the cost of energy. When this administration came in, that was one of the things that they pledged, that we will really reduce the cost of power to industries and to everywhere. But today the cost of power is higher than it was in 2013. I'm in industry and I know what it is. In spite of the fact that we are spending an average of 40 billion to the Ministry of Energy in power generation and so forth. The second area is in the cost of freight. SGR was mooted largely to try and address that. But as you know, today it's cheaper to still ferry your goods from Mombasa to Nairobi using trucks than SGR. And so really that competitiveness has not been achieved because some of the priorities, some of the ways in which we have been doing things, and some of the projects that have been included in this have not been useful. I mean, look at it. I'll give you an example of Lamu. That port, nearly 42 billion by last year had gone into it to pay those bats. Nearly 42 billion. But let me tell you, in my own view, it's a white elephant. How many ships have docked there except the one that was there 2 weeks ago when it was launched? And who is going to carry goods from there all the way? Why would I want to carry my goods from Lamu when Mombasa is nearer to me? When the infrastructure has not been put in place, there are no roads from Lamu going all the way to surely you have to still go through Mombasa. So some of the challenges are because these projects, their design, their has not been done, their selection, their appraisal. These things have not been done very well, and so it's the reason why you find all these things have challenges and they do not achieve the objectives for which they were.
But how is it that every project, most projects that have been undertaken with the government is facing this kind of criticism where we hear that they are elitist, they will not bring meaning to the Kenyan Mwananchi or to Wanjiko. Where is the disconnect?
Yes, the disconnect is, let me explain it in this way. In Vision 2030, during Kibaki's time, that is a blueprint for development. That the plan was this country, you know, must remain competitive in terms of its industries and other things. But the way it was done, it was participatory. They went around the entire country. Views were collected. Which projects would help us? Which activities, which programs? You know, it looked at political, it looked at social, it looked at the economic ones and everything. And it was a very, you would say, very elaborate, and it was done through a very inclusive process. But when now Jubilee comes in and says, okay, forget that, we are going to go for the big four. And you come up with, you know, projects which have actually been conceived in the party manifestos. A good example, let me tell you, the Kulalu irrigation, 1 million. Or the one, the laptop. These are all the things that were projects which were conceived in the party manifestos. And so the challenge is when the design has not been done properly, there's that inclusive or participatory aspect of it has not been looked at. The entire, you know, outcomes. One of the challenges, by the way, in this country is we do not look at the outcomes on our projects. We do not set targets and say, okay, we are putting in money into this SGR.
Right.
What are the outcomes? We expect the cost of freight to reduce.
Right.
We expect this quantity of tons to be done, so that there is no measurement, and we keep going every year saying, last year we put in this amount, let us put this amount. So it's about really looking back and saying, how we achieving, are these projects achieving, do you get returns, do you get value for money? That is not being done. So I would say, actually, unfortunately, some of these legacy projects are projects which are the leaders come up with, and they're not coming from the people. It's not people-owned, it's not bottom-up, it's not based on need assessment, it's not, some of it is about egos, it's about the desire to leave a name on a more. I think these are the challenges we have in our country.
Inclusive participation is where we got it wrong. What do you think? Remember, we are also engaging you. Tweeters at Akisa Wandera, at KTN News KE. We are asking you whether you are satisfied with the development projects by the Jubilee government and the allocation of funds that have been made there. Are you satisfied with the government's implementation of development projects against the funds allocated to them? Tweeters at Akisa Wandera, at KTN News KE. When we get back, Kenneth Mwige, the Director General of the Kenya Vision 2030 Delivery Secretariat, will also be joining us to speak to us about some of the rising issues on the Big Four agenda and how they align with the Kenya Vision 2030 Development Blueprint. Stay with us. We still have a lot more lined up for you.